Welcome. It's a little windy. See if I can adjust this a little bit. I don't think I'm going to be sharing this with a bunch of individuals. I'm not sure if anybody joins when I share it with them. So I'm going to skip a bunch of people this time that I've been inviting. Inviting a couple of people I've seen come on. I'm going to just see if I can tweak this so it doesn't blow quite so much, I hope. We're got quite a little rig going here. Well, hopefully we got a little protection against the wind. It's about 30, maybe 31, maybe 10 degrees less with wind chill. The winds have been about 15. I think they're dying down now a little bit, so maybe we're closer to 10. Certainly seems a little more calm in that interim, you know, between the bouts of wind. But at any rate, we're here. And we're going to do a little bit of practice. I wonder if I might be able to angle that a tiny bit more. I could be a little bit closer and not have to yell quite so much. We'll see if this whole thing comes crashing down, but maybe just that little bit is going to be a little bit better. Anyway, here I'm at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. In the panda enclosure after the snowstorm, which, as you know, is the most important place to be. We're going to get started in a moment. The plan is to do forward stance today. I'm just adjusting my my scratch pad here. For our forward stance practice, which, you know, who knows. I had written Gong Bu, but I think I'll be doing a more generic idea about Gong Bu. Probably not very loud right now. As I've said, some of these I will raise the volume on afterwards, so let me know if you think I need to do that in this case. Bump it up. I think I can do it about 20%. So anyway, I'm here in my horse stance. I'm going to just shift to a single-legged horse stance. Of course, we have training horse stance in a repertoire now, so you could do that instead if that's where you are. So just shifting in the horse stance, keeping the pelvis level, the knee tracking, and just settling down into it, kind of being present on one side for a time, and then present on the other side. We didn't do any teaching on shifting or pivoting, so I just ask you to do it well and carefully, and maybe we'll get into how you do it well down the road. But slowly, attentively, conscientiously, patiently, and you know, listen to your body, listen to the principles, and don't invite the ego to the discussion. So I'm just being in that horse stance on one leg. I'm keeping my hands in my pocket so I don't get prematurely cold. I'm excited to do the stance we have on tap today. And as soon as we're done, I guess we'll have the sun going down. It's quite overcast, but the sun will be going down, and then hopefully I'll go in and warm myself up and get ready for my evening classes. Good. So I'm going to do a little breath synchronized shifting. So one whole exhale drives me to the other single leg. If you get there before your exhale is done, keep exhaling. If you don't, adjust next time your pace. When you're here, enjoy one slow inhalation. And of course, if you're ready, exhale, coordinate that with the shift to the other side. Then enjoy one long, slow, quiet, easeful inhalation while you're there. And over to the side. I'll addenda. I think today's class is brought to you by Yin Sha Che Tu Bien. Oh, I'll open the wrong file here. Good, so shift again, coordinate with the breath. We can also do our regular horse stance training, settled in into the center. So just settled in here. We did a whole bunch of versions of this. Did the torso turning, figure eight torso turning, ratcheting down, shifting, ratcheting, shifting, rising, and so forth. A whole bunch of versions of this. I don't know about a whole bunch, but certainly a half dozen. Now I'm just settled into that horse stance. After yesterday, you might be in a training horse stance. And I'm going to just coordinate the breath because I was writing and not really doing it. I just explained it. I'm going to just come back to the center now. Right, I feel updated. That's good. I'll check the feed too. I see it looks like a few people have joined in. Okay, so we're gonna do a little forward stance practice now. And the forward stance is something that I believe you'll see in every single martial art, although by a lot of different names. But as I define it here today, I think you'll find that in any martial art, you're going to find a version of this somewhere in it, probably featured, probably as the very most common. Looks like our noise canceling shield shifted a little bit, and since I could see it, I figure I'll give it a little adjustment here. See if I can, I got sort of a clothespin here to possibly help. It may shift again. And so a whole bunch of different ways that we can describe the forward stance. But I'm going to start with my forward foot pointing to camera. So for me, that's northwest. And I'm going to put my rear foot on the same line. So both the heel and the toe and the heel and the toe are all on the same line. Now, just right there, that can be enough challenge for people. Rest assured, there's variations of these and adjustments. So if you're watching me do it and thinking, I can't do that, wait a little bit. I'm going to describe some alternatives. So, and at any rate, this is just my method of sort of describing it to camera. It isn't really how I would get into it. And the way I'm describing it will start us off a little bit less stably than if we were to normally just get into it. So if I do that in profile, it's like that. Now I don't want to be so far that it incites me to lean, but certainly the practice can be done fairly extended. And what I'm going to do is with my rear foot, I'm going to pivot my rear foot on the heel 30 degrees, maybe 45 degrees. My weight, I'm going to shift to the front. For now, you could do 100%, 90%, something like that if you like. Quite often, it's done something like 70%, you know, 2/3 to 3/4 of your weight on the front leg, like so. So hopefully, my left heel is hidden by my front leg. In other words, I'm not way over here, right? So that's the general idea. So in profile, although it probably doesn't make much difference, I'll be something like this. So we can explore in the forward stance, you know, how far forward you go, how low you can drop yourself, right? So, you know, that was a wrong angle to show that, you know, have you stepped back enough that you can be low enough to have this thigh parallel and that foot still flat on the ground and so forth. But of course, that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to be very moderated in our approach to the stance, lest we summon the ego, which will invite us to dance, and that's a dance that you'll pay for the next morning, I think, or if not, the next forever. So here's my forward stance. Now, in a particular style, this wouldn't be called forward stance. It might be called front stance, or gong bu, or bow and arrow stance, or bow stance, or mountain climbing stance, or all these different terms and different styles, or even among different teachers. But essentially, what a forward stance does in all of its many incarnations, it allows me not to expose my front as much as I might here, so I can protect my center line. Often people talk about protecting the groin. My groin is much more exposed here than it is here, as it's much more protected by my lead leg, smaller target. Also, of course, further away as I step the leg back, and this allows me to rotate a fair amount compared to how much I can rotate here. So even though I'm rotating my trunk a fair amount, my groin in this horse stance hasn't gone very far, so that target hasn't really moved. Whereas here, I can turn quite a bit more, even though I'm still keeping that knee pointing towards you, that thigh in its position. So often that's one of the things that we'll see. We'll be in a in a stance that allows me to be forward, right? It's a stance that allows me to drive forward, and it's a stance that allows me to close off my centers to some extent. Also, it's generally not understood to be a stance that gives you a challenge to bring your rear side into the forward fight, right? So the forward is where my forward foot is facing. If I was too far back, too far open, too closed, among a number of different things, like here, I can't really reach this to you. I guess you guys can't see that too much, but this reaches quite a bit better. When I'm in a front stance, these can reach quite similarly, right? And the idea is that in my front stance, my left hip, my rear hip can turn into it, keeping a level pelvis and turn to face square, in the same way that my horse stance can keep my pelvis square. My front stance can keep my pelvis square. It can also turn it and protect the groin. But also, even when I am square, that's a smaller target than here, which hopefully you can see that on screen. So I'm not so far away that I've protected this, but I really only have this one weapon, you know, my right side, but I have two, or two defenses, whatever. I'll just take the stance now. So I say take the stance, I just put my foot open where I want it. I didn't go onto this tightrope first and then turn it. That's just how I'm describing it, so you understand the relationship. So a particular teacher will give you particular alignments, particular you know, aesthetic preferences and so forth, and certainly particular names. I'm sure we'll do a few variations of what I'm calling a forward stance here, but generally when we want to feel that, I can drive more power with my rear foot, so I can start to the rear and arrive forward. I can reach with each hand pretty well the same. I have a smaller profile and I can make it smaller, right? The pelvis is still level, and anyway, I want to say a whole bunch of other things, but I just want to kind of give us a chance to be in it. Generally, the stance kind of has a feel of a lunge, if you know what a lunge is. Generally has this kind of forward, narrow idea of kind of imposing your will at a distance while not overly exposing yourself, right? Because I have this kind of rotation that is available to me. One of the challenges with not being able to bring my rear side tools into the fight is that it's much easier for you to tell which hand I'm going to use for a given job, right? To knock your arm out of the way, to go for you, to try and hold something. If I'm here, it's much harder for you to know which hand can block you, which hand is a threat. So being able to keep both of these hands into the range that I'm referencing, and the vector that I'm referencing in the stance is really, really important. Even if I don't use this hand, it's used because of the stance. So the concern of this is likely in the other person's mind. I'm gonna warm up my throat here. Very nice to be at the National Zoo today. I'm finally found this bundle me up thing, and it doesn't see my face, so I can't log in quite fast. Anyway, welcome. I'm glad that you're here. So I'm going to just kind of go over one other variation while we're here, and that is I described the feet as being on this slack line or tightrope or what have you. If we picture instead that I'm on a board, let's say a wooden board, a floorboard or something like that, so a few inches, right? You know, maybe 3 to 4 centimeters, something like that. If I stand on my rear foot on one side of the board and my forward foot on the other side of the board, and then I open my foot, let's say 30, 40, 45 degrees, something in there, I'm a little bit more exposed in the groin, but I'm largely in the same stance. And different styles, of course, will argue for this one purely and never this one for their reasons. But for our purposes, this is still a forward stance. It's just somebody else's. So I think that view, you can see that. And often, you know, you'll see it kind of practiced like this, where the knee doesn't violate the ball of the foot. The thigh is, I don't know if I'm quite parallel. I ran into a snowbank, but close to parallel. This leg still has that ability to push, and you can see that my weight is between the feet, but I'm favoring the front, right? And you know whatever I'd be doing in the stance. So that's a nice one to spend a little bit of time in. Maybe as we warm up, we'll introduce. I forgot what it's called. It's Ding Boo, but it's Ding. There's a third character, like I don't remember. Yeah, I don't know. But it's a Troy Lightfoot stance, which is a hard one for people to do. So I thought that might be a little fun. But it's therefore, or it's a forward stance that you'll see among Troy Lightfoot players, or some of them anyway. I'm sure within that lineage there's, you know, disagreements and arguments and varying claims to the throne. So here's our forward stance. Now, as with most stances, a forward stance, you can have your weight to the rear, right? I could be loading something up to drive forward. I could be forward and drive back, you know, like tug of war, like I'm pulling something here, allows me rotation. I can be in the middle. I can be cheating front, but still relatively middle, right? So I may be 55, 60% forward. And I think most often you'll hear it described as a 7-3 stance or a 70-30 stance or a, you know, 70% to the front leg kind of a stance. So that's a nice starting place. You might see it called a bow stance. You might see it called a bow and arrow stance. And of course, you might see different people call a whole different thing a bow stance, and a whole different thing a bow and arrow stance. I have what my forward stance in my Gong Fu is called the front stance, which that's what we call it. And it's not either of these. It's a different stance, but it still kind of fits that idea of being able to turn the trunk, being able to drive the power forward, generally found as its default more forward weighted than to the rear. But anyway, that's the idea. So here's our forward stance. I'll just check in again, then maybe we'll do some variations. So another variation of this, and this is a harder one to do for flexibility. It's often harder for people to do this one if they can have, let's say, this distance and they're comfortable and everything's pretty solid. In order to do this next version, they have to be here. But most often what happens is they say, well, I know I can do this. This is how we stretch, for example. Now I'm going to transition to that stance, and they keep the same distance, but things go out of whack, right? Their pelvis tips. They add a lot of tension to the small of the back. They get lordotic, etc., etc. So I would say that if this has been a pretty reasonable distance for you, maybe get it, you know, just that little bit shorter, and then we'll transition to the next stance. And once you're in it and you understand it, if a little bit wider works for you, or longer, I would call that longer, you know, go for it, make that adjustment, no problem. So I'm gonna go back to the tightrope idea, just by way of describing what I'm doing. So there's my tightrope, shift to the front, and I'm gonna pivot my back foot on the heel 90 degrees, and that's another version. You'll also see this where it's rather than a tightrope, it's on a board, right? So I'm just, you know, I'm that far apart, if that is readable to the camera, and you'll see it this way. So for now, whichever one works is fine, right? This is gonna probably be a little bit easier on the coordination of the thighs, the knees, the femurs, and the hips than is this. But generally this, you know, where I turn my foot in, that's even easier for all parties, whether I'm tightrope or board. But I've committed to doing it here. So usually the challenge here is that as people try and turn that foot, this leg collapses in. I've shifted my weight off it because I don't want to endanger my knee. And then the other challenge is that they can kind of keep their femur here, and they can keep their weight forward, and they can keep this leg back, but they can't really bring this arm, you know, they can't really bring this hip closer to square, so that they end up a little bit more here, as opposed to they were able to square the hip here, as opposed to being in this comfortably and knowing where to keep the femur and turn the hips and being able to do it. So I would say that if you're that far off, I'm doing one lower than the other to be sure you can see. If you're that far off, try one of the other stances and work on the precision and the application of the consciousness to the pelvis, right? The hip flexors, the psoas, the whole region, the inguinal crease, the quad, the yow, that whole thing. And work on your flexibility, your proprioception, your muscle control, you know, your physiological studies, your warm-ups, you know, you feel free to send me a hot chocolate and a bunch of Chinese herbs. I'm probably gonna be in need of that. Luckily, I haven't gotten sick from COVID. I'm just gonna get double pneumonia being forced to teach outside now. So that's our world. Oh yeah, I did the other one. So anyway, there's our front stance, or forward stance, or whatever this be called in a given art. One of the other challenges people do is they keep that front knee good, so that's great. And the weight's partly to the rear, you know, not quite half usually, but a third usually. And people collapse this, I'm going to shift my weight forward. They collapse this knee in trying to face forward and settle into this, and they don't really have a good structure here, as opposed to keeping that leg alive and not collapse in. Now I can shift a little bit weight back onto it, have it in a better position. So again, that's one of those cases where the ego will get you in trouble. And you'll say, boy, I can face forward and reach the hands. I can drive this. I can settle down. I can, you know, my thigh is working hard. Meanwhile, you've collapsed that leg and you've lost other elements of your struggle, of your structure, you know, of your struggle. That's good. So something to watch for. I'm going to add a couple notes about that so we can at least work on a mnemonic for it, if not develop an isometric practice for it. I guess it's isotonic. I suppose if you're settled into the stance, we maybe call it isotonic, but I kind of feel like it's isometric because I feel minuscule movement as I do that. Anyway, I'll get there when I get there. But I'm busy here in the panda enclosure making iced coffee because I'm one of those people that tries to make a living teaching, so I get 23 degrees outside in iced coffee. I mean, it was warm when I started. To be fair, there's still some residual heat. Shout out to How You Brewing and LBI. Okay. I thinking I'd check in. I don't know if I have any other notes for Gongbu or forward stance that I want to get across, but I do know that I had that I had made some. So I'm just sat in this stance now. And of course, if you have a stance that would fall under the heading forward stance, you're certainly welcome to do your very own and practice along with me. I still haven't found the note I wanted, sorry. There it is, or I found where it is. Now I gotta scroll through on. I was wondering if people would want to do Wubu Chuan or not, but I've had precious little interest. So it may be just something I teach and post on Patreon or something. So there's our Deng Shambu is how the mountain climbing stance. Gongjianbu, bow and arrow stance, Gongbu, spear stance. I call it a spear stance myself a lot when we have that kind of 30 or 45 degree. It's been called a forward lunge. I mentioned the lunge right earlier. I've heard it called the dance step or Zenkutsu Dachi, which is like a leaning forward stance. Yeah, I really thought I had a different note here for this, but that's okay. We have exactly what we have. Yeah, I don't think that we did a resting stance either. That would have been fun. Yeah, okay. So one of the ideas, don't know how true this is that if we think about a forward stance, often called the bow stance or bow and arrow stance, it allows me to have a bladed body to my direction of intention. So if the camera is the target, the hay bale for my arrow, this allows me to rotate the trunk, keep my intention forward, right? So that's this hand holding the bow, this femur and knee, and then sort of release. Doing it this way would be an awful lot harder. I can't really use the weight shift in the hip as much. It's certainly much easier for me to just shoot it off to my side here. Like here's my horse stance bow and arrow. So you'll see it kind of this way. And what we have with the bow and arrow, I'll do it in profile, is this idea of something fixed and something pulling against that or moving in relation to the fixed. And a similar, maybe an inverted kind of idea, which could be the reason for the naming of the stance, and if not, it may just be a mnemonic. But we'll do this as that little sort of isotonic, isometric practice anyway, is to settle into your stance. And again, here, or here, or here, or here. We've done a few different versions of it, so whichever one you like. But the idea is that the weight arrives in the front leg because the back leg is pushing. So that helps us get into the idea of not collapsing the knee. The knee shouldn't lock, but it can get fairly straight, especially if you have a longer stance, right? But the idea is that the back leg, if we look at the shape of the back leg is straight-ish, and the front leg has this shape, right? Hopefully you can kind of see that in the camera, right? Maybe even a bit like this. So if we look at this, we can see my left leg is a bow, right? That crescent shape, and my back leg is a straight line. There's your bow and your arrow. And the arrow provides the energy to the bow, right? Which is probably where the the metaphor breaks down. But the idea is that the arrow is going to drive forward, right? And that arrow being driven forward is in relation to that front leg receiving its weight but not moving. So you kind of have this idea of the arrow, right, here creates the shape of the bow. Of course, we're used to thinking of it in terms of the arrow being drawn back because it's connected to the bow, right, through the tendons, right? The bow becomes more concave as it gets drawn. So similar idea here. As I push, this gets more of that familiar bow shape. So anyway, isometric, isotonic practice here is just to maintain, let's say 70%, and maintain the pressure here without tipping yourself over or continuing to shift, so that this receives this continual pressure from the rear leg. So this leg is quite alive as I sit into the stance. So we'll try that for a minute here. And I'll update our notes. Good, let's switch. So generally that's going to give you a whole different experience in the legs than simply taking a stance and settling into it. This time I want to make sure that we coordinate it with the breath. I don't want to time it, but I want to coordinate my action with my breath. So I can go into that isometric experience and focus on long exhalations, brief inhalations, or perhaps I can try and have 3 breath cycles while I'm in it. Another version is for me to, so I'll do this to represent isotonic, like the push and the receive, right? So inhale, exhale, trying to exaggerate what the legs do so you can see it. And then inhale, exhale, so I'm just in the stance now, and then come out, right? Another way I can do it is I can, so I'll do the isotonic, isometric with my hands just to sort of show you what I'm doing, because it won't show you much. So exhale, so really working that push and that receive, and then inhale, now I just kind of rest into the stance. Exhale, inhale. So I'm going to do that now without, showing you. I'm going to just kind of settle into my stance. This is tough on slippery because as I push, it's easy for me to just have my purchase go. Boy, this feels really high for me. That's so weird. But at any rate, coordinate with the breath. And make sure that your hips are able to turn. Whether or not you turn them is up to you at this point, because you can functionally use the stance for a number of things. But you do want to make sure that you can turn to be essentially square to the front. And that can be harder to do when you're focused on pushing here. So I'm going to try that again with my feet. I was doing it that way. Now I'm going to try it that way. So just a slight variation. I'll do it at a different angle. Yeah, it looks like it's getting close to be time for me to head inside and get ready for my class. So thank you, Seafood Tong. I appreciate it. I see your comment. Much appreciated. I'm sure somebody like you can really teach this stance. It's an odd thing, I think, to teach a stance and not know who you're teaching to. Trying to cover all the bases, not get anybody in trouble. I've developed the aptitude to see somebody in person and know what to offer as a correction and help them out that way. But this is different. I think we got about a foot of snow yesterday. Snowed all day, but I think we missed any snow today. I think snow was north of us. A little bit of rain overnight after the snow, but I think I must have plowed and shoveled 6 times, maybe 5, I don't remember. But each time it's an hour to 2 hours. So it's pretty much the whole day. Good. Oh, that's not flat. A lot of times people want to have their back heel come up or their back foot roll. Those are usually indicative of somebody reaching too long to try and go lower. Again, ego. So I would not want to see somebody doing that. Certainly in a given system, you could have a stance where you're encouraged to raise that and pivot that, but I would think that you don't want to be doing it when you're not consciously choosing to. If you've had a chance to push with me, push hands with me, and you've paid attention to me talking about knee, femur, knee, femur, knee, femur, knee, femur, tracking, knee, femur, you might get a sense of how I develop my push hands. That principle pays off every day because I'm not injuring myself so far as I know so far, but I got 35 years, I don't know, 35 years of it in. But it certainly becomes resonant and pays off when I'm pushing hands, both because my knee isn't moving and because I notice when yours is. So you don't have an advantage and I get an advantage, and there's an additional advantage there because you don't know the advantage I have. And you may not know that you don't have an advantage that I'm suggesting that you have through my push hands. I have to say, it doesn't feel as cold out here as I thought it would be. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's warming up, but I don't know, I feel okay. So maybe it's the front forward stance. So I was mentioning the trolley foot version, so I'm going to take a training horse stance here. Where can I go to? You can see it. So my heels are on this line, and Oh yeah, I said training. I didn't go wide enough when I reshuffled. So I'm going to shift my weight to my right leg towards the camera, and that means track the knee, track the femur. So I'm going to pause here because my right foot is pointing perpendicular to camera. So that's southwest. Northwest is camera. And I'm going to be addressing northwest as best I can without violating my principles or hurting my knee or leaning or something like that. But my intention is to direct myself to camera, but I need I need to direct this femur perpendicular to camera. In other words, right where it is. So when I shift to it, oops, that's a little slippery there. Let me yeah, that should be okay. When I pivot my rear foot 45 degrees or so, weight on the front, but I don't have the weight pressing to the outside of the knee. My weight is going down into the foot, and I feel that my femur tracks in the same direction as my weighted foot. But turning this foot, turning my attention, turning my hips and trunk, very easy. I guess I'll do this in profile. Wait, I don't know if I want to do it. Maybe I can just fake it. I'll go very small. When I turn this in, it's very easy for this knee to kick out, right? Good. So this is that ding stance. I wonder what it's called. I don't know if I made a note of it. I was just thinking it, but it's like the character ding or nail, but it's it's like appearing like a ding character stance, or you know, and I don't know if I have a note of it or not. I have notes on plombata, which isn't going to help you guys now. Yeah, that's too bad. I mean, I think they translate it as a bow stance quite often too. I don't think it has to do with ding like an elbow. It's more of the nail. Yeah, that's okay. I don't want to spend my time looking it up. But there's our forward stance in Wing Chun. And the idea here is, again, not only am I protecting the groin by being narrow, but I'm protecting the groin by having the leg, you know, have that crossing route, right? So that perpendicular to it. And also, in theory, you're protecting this knee or leg as well. You know, that's the theory. I don't know. I think it's just a matter of, well, it's protected from these things, but less so for these. This is protected from those things, but less so than that. I don't think that this is more protective of the leg or the knee. It's just differently protective. Maybe more so, maybe less so, but certainly differently. I don't think it's a binary. This is the stance that protects the knee. Everybody else doesn't know what they're doing. I don't think it's that. So there's our, you know, I'm sure it's not Ding Bu, but we'll call it Choi Lei Foot bow stance or Choi Lei Foot forward stance. Same thing, like, can I turn that hip to reach relatively equally? And yes, I can. Can I do that without having the butt go out and the butt become lordotic and the body lean and the knee get torqued out? Yes, I can. Does this feel normal to me? Nope, this does not. This is not my style. I'll do one in profile too, I guess. Choi Lei Foot has a lot of these kind of bring the energy here and then bring it there. You know, like these big kind of whipping movements and stuff. It's really fun to watch. And it's really great when you find an art that is really vicious and dangerous. It's a great art to befriend people in. Then you could just be, I have so many friends that do that are, you know, adore me, and we we share laughs, and there's no tension and no likelihood of a fight. So anyway, we'll do a little cool down, and then I gotta get thinking about my next class. So I'm gonna just repeat the leg circles that we've done the last couple days. So circle from the hip, circle from the knee. Please consider sharing this with somebody you think could benefit, particularly somebody recovering from illness, obesity, surgery, recovering from age-related despondency. And you could certainly hit that notification bell if you want to be notified when I go live. But I think I'm going to wind these up and not keep adding stances, because it doesn't seem like it found the audience. And I'm going to focus my creative energies elsewhere. So thank you all very much. It's Steve here at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. So thank you, pandas.